Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a new year of the Public Funds Public Schools webinar series. My name is Jessica Levin. I'm the Director of Public Funds Public Schools, which is a collaboration of Education Law Center, Southern Poverty Law Center, and the SPLC Action Fund. PFPS works to ensure that public funds remain in public schools to maintain, support, and strengthen our public education system. And you can visit our website at pfps.org and sign up for updates on the contact page. Today's webinar is entitled, Is Anti-Masking Anti-Public Education? Exploiting the Pandemic to Privatize. And we're honored to have some of the top experts and advocates on this topic here to speak with us today. We'll have plenty of time for audience questions toward the end after the panel discussion, so please put those in the Q&A box rather than the chat. And we'll also be recording this webinar and posting it on our website. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Charles Siler. Mr. Siler is a pro-public education consultant who works to advise and connect groups resisting the destruction of public institutions and promoting collective empowerment. So thank you very much, and please take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Jessica. And really, I want to thank the entire Public Funds for Public Schools team for putting all of this together and collecting some incredible voices. So I just want to set a little bit of the scene. And if you're paying attention at all, you're well aware that there's been a decades-long assault on this amazing community project we have called public education and public schools. And it's something that has been advanced by a group of people with a radical political agenda. And the assault on public education connects to so many different issues. We've talked in another webinar about the connection between school privatization and voter suppression. And today we get to talk about the connection between public health policy and this assault on public education. And so I'm very excited to be joined today by Adora. She is the president of the Florida State Conference of the NAACP. We also have Bacardi, who is the interim legal director for the for children's rights at the Southern Poverty Law Center. And then we have Beth, the executive director with Save Our Schools, Arizona. And each of them have a really incredible perspective into this large issue. But first, before we get into some of their expertise, a little bit of background. There's several states that have prohibited local mask mandates. And in the middle of a pandemic where hundreds of thousands of Americans have died already, we've had millions of hospitalizations, we're in a place where children under the age of 12 still don't have a vaccine authorized even for emergency use at this point. This is something that touches a lot of communities. I think that when we get into this, we'll also highlight the fact that this really disproportionately affects marginalized communities. So we're talking about communities of color, low income folks, people living on tribal lands. And so it's really important to also remember who's bearing the largest brunt of some of this while these anti-public health policies are being pushed by people with a radical agenda. And some of the states that we've seen implement these kinds of prohibitions on mask mandates in schools would include Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah. And generally, they're only covering public schools. These usually are written in a way that excludes prohibitions on public schools or on private schools. And what this does is this creates a condition where parents who have a vested interest in protecting their children's safety are often left with no option but to look outside of the public school system. And this is at a time when public schools remain incredibly popular despite all of the rhetoric, despite all of the challenges of the pandemic, and while school choice options and alternatives remain incredibly unpopular. Most people want to have a well-funded public school in their community that serves the children in their home and in their neighborhoods. And so that is a real unfortunate byproduct of this pandemic, is that it is being leveraged and weaponized so that people with this radical political agenda, actually a group of people that I used to work for when I was a lobbyist working within the state policy network, aiding groups like the Goldwater Institute and others in advancing the idea of school vouchers and pushing those policies in different with different legislative bodies. One of the interesting things is that despite the incredible public pushback and lack of popularity for these programs, a lot of these politicians who are pushing these voucher programs have had to circumvent normal legislative procedures to do so. A couple voucher programs have been expanded in states like Arizona and Florida through executive order or through some executive maneuver to implement those rather than going through the full legislative process. I even testified in New Hampshire on a bill there that implemented a universal voucher bill. It would have been one of the largest expansions in the country. And it didn't have support from the legislators. And so then they pulled a maneuver that really is never used in that state by reinserting it into part of the budget, because it's the only way that they could get this really unpopular program through. And just to tell you, or just to give you a little hint of how unpopular, when we looked at who was showing up in support of this this voucher program and who was showing up in opposition, it was a 7-to-1 opposition against this bill. These things are wildly unpopular. And now, unfortunately, their unpopularity and the people behind them are putting our communities at risk. So that's why I'm really excited to jump in here and start talking to some of the panelists, because first off, we've seen as a result of these anti-mask, anti-public health mandates that there are lawsuits popping up across the country. Most of them are fighting these anti-mask mandates, but then there are some occasionally where individuals are actually going to court to kind of push for freedom from mask mandates. So if we can, I'd like to have Bacardi come first and just give us a picture of kind of the legal ground and an idea of some of the cases that have been moving forward.
So thank you for that, and thank you for the introduction and the context for this moment we are in. It is really troubling for those of us who are on the ground and talking with parents and families and communities and seeing real day-to-day impacts for children, and particularly children who are most vulnerable, such as children who have medical conditions and disabilities. And in fact, that is one of the things that we are seeing most, is the cases that are going forward in federal court, which is where there is probably the greatest promise of being able to stop some of the movement, and particularly the bans on mask mandates, is because those bans do indeed violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that is in fact the theory that we have proceeded on in one of our cases in Cobb County, along with its violation of the Rehabilitation Act. And so we have seen these cases succeed in a number of states. But there are also some cases that have proceeded in state courts that seem to not fare so well under other theories. We also brought 2 claims in Florida challenging the Department of Health regulation under the Procedures Act, the Administrative Procedures Act, as one method of trying to do a quick turnaround and trying to stop these regulations that are clearly arbitrary and capricious and do not meet the basic requirements of even the methods that they have been passed. Many of them have been pushed through as emergency orders, even where there is no emergency and where they do not meet the requirements for those emergencies. We have worked closely with the school districts here. We were honored to be able to represent the NAACP in 2 of those petitions. And unfortunately, what we find often in our courts is that those courts are currently stacked with a lot of appointees of people who are opposed to public education and have found reasons to put those cases out of court. The judge in our case found that we did not have standing. The state argued that it was speculative that children with disabilities and medical conditions could show harm, which is a pretty remarkable result. We were very happy, though, that we were in the case because the state was also arguing that the school districts did not have standing, that they couldn't challenge a regulation that directly regulated them. And so had we not been in the case, they may have also been dismissed. And so, we argued in our briefing that it could not very well be the case that no one had standing to challenge these regulations. And so they were not dismissed based on standing, which we were excited to see. At least one of those districts has continued on in its path to try to challenge those regulations. Sadly, there's other political maneuvering that has happened in the midst of that. In Florida in particular, we had the appointment of a new Surgeon General who then issued a new emergency rule, even though there had been 45 days since the last. And that rule pretty much duplicated the old one, but found reason to issue a new emergency rule in order to moot the case just before it was going to trial. So there's a lot of political maneuvering. There is a lot at stake and a lot at risk for families and for children. I'm really happy to see that the FEA, the Florida Education Association, has been posting a dashboard that keeps everyone informed about the number of deaths and closings and positive cases. And sadly, we are at, since the start of the school year, 21 children that we have lost and 97 educators. So these are real people. This is not collateral damage that is acceptable. If there had been any other circumstance where we saw that kind of loss, we would be demanding that there be some action taken. And so this is something that we have to pay attention to because there are real people and families that are suffering, that have lost their children because of political maneuvering, and that is unacceptable.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think all of us are aware that not only the children at risk, but the spread in the community to other vulnerable people. That those losses cause trauma for children as well, in addition to everyone else who is suffering. But it's definitely fascinating the way that some of these folks advancing these privatization agendas have addressed, approaching the needs of special needs students and families of students with special needs, especially since they're often so willing to use them as the face of their privatization efforts. So, but Adora, you have experience in this realm as a former special educator, but also obviously someone who's heavily involved in the Black community in Florida, where there's been this continuous march to expand these voucher programs and other school choice things. And then throwing on top of all that, this really anti-public health, anti-student safety, anti-community mask and vaccine restrictions. What are you seeing in Florida, and what can you kind of tell us about these communities being impacted, the special needs and Black communities?
I can tell you that the special needs and Black communities, can you hear me? Yes. The special needs and Black community they really are impacted more than anyone, because when you look at us, we were never funded as much as we should have been from the first place. Money has always been taken away from the special needs community and the Black community. Through the years that has happened, we've been fighting this fight, and now we thought we would take a breath, and no breath. We are even more now behind the pandemic. Then, of course, we've been overwhelmed. Our death numbers, our pain and hospitalization issues, it's just been horrific for us. And then when they come and bother with our school board members now, taking money, threatening to take money away from the school board members and the schools in which they have been trying to serve, all up and down the road. And what we know, it's the people who have the money that obviously are funding these horrible and horrific acts. The people with the money pay for people to go in, for an example, into your private schools, into your voucher programs. over and over again, you keep hearing about our money's going down in public school, their money's going up. Our teachers being paid lower, they're paying people who are not even qualified as teachers to go into the charter schools, to go into the voucher programs. This is just horrific. We are fighting. We are not deterred. We're not going to let them stop us. We have a governor in Florida that nobody should have. We just never seen anything like this. He's not going to stop until we're all dead, he thinks. But we have got to use the vote now more than ever. Everybody has to vote in order for us to get a public program, the quality, high quality program for our special needs children and Black students. We just don't understand why everybody is not trying to have this fight. Those persons who are fighting with all of the money, do you know that they are losing, but they don't know that? We've got to show them that they have lost. It's not going to happen. You're not going to destroy our schools anymore. You're not going to run teachers out of the classroom. We now are looking for people to teach. And guess what? The people with the money get people who have no qualifications to teach. So the issues that the community is facing, the whole economic development issue of people not being able to keep jobs, get jobs, nor even understand that there will be a job. So we have our hands full. We're asking everybody to join us who believe in public education. Public education is the only way that any of us can stay alive, because you believe me, if you take away from the bottom, you will never have a top.
Absolutely, and I love your passion. It's definitely an issue that I wish a lot more people had the same kind of fire that you do about this, Adora, and then we really could actually affect a lot of change. So with that, though, I think one of the things you said is that Governor DeSantis in Florida is not willing to stop just because people are dying. Like, that means nothing to him. And that's one thing about these folks with their radical agenda, and especially when it comes to school privatization, is that they've always been willing to accept a high degree of social cost in order to realize their vision, whether that's like increasing mass incarceration through private prisons, or destroying schools and public education for marginalized people through privatization schemes, and now through sabotaging public health. It really does not matter to them at all. But fortunately, there are people on the ground who are making a difference. And one of those groups has been Save Our Schools Arizona, that's been able to successfully fight off some of these voucher expansions. And unfortunately, just because of the nature of this, like the behemoth of privatization, you can't win every battle. But we also saw that Governor Ducey's recent voucher expansion with COVID relief funds was shot down by the Biden administration. So Beth, can you give us some color on what's been going on in Arizona and how that connects to this whole public health issue?
Yeah, hi, thank you so much, Charles and Adora and Bacardi. In Arizona, I'm a teacher, I'm a parent, as well as an advocate for public schools. And I have to say, speaking for everybody, that this year has honestly been harder than last year in a lot of ways. And I think people don't realize that. In Arizona, our school board members, our principals, even teachers are under extreme threat of attack, even personal harm. It has gotten wildly out of hand, and it's all because of the political maneuvering that we're all talking about. So Governor Ducey here in Arizona, he's shown a complete blatant disregard for public health throughout the pandemic, at every single turn. And it's really, this year has been incredibly disheartening because he forced through a ban on mask mandates in the 11th hour at the state legislature, the very last day, by shoving it into budget bills. Luckily, that's been rejected by the courts, but it is going up to the Arizona Supreme Court. So we teachers and parents kind of feel held hostage by all of this back and forth, and we're not really sure whether we can keep our kids safe in the classroom, whether we can keep our fellow educators safe. I know my district has been amazing. They have bucked the governor. They refused to be bullied by him, and they passed mask mandates for all students and all teachers, and we've had that after the third week of the year. And honestly, on the ground, you can tell there's a difference. My friends whose kids go to schools in other districts are having these exposure letters every single day. They're having to quarantine. Kids are in and out of school. It's a complete disaster. And yet in our district, we've been able to, for the most part, keep the kids in schools. And so, constantly we're asking the governor, isn't our shared goal to keep kids in school? Shouldn't that be everybody's goal? And it's a basic mask mandate that does that. The CDC came out last week and showed in Arizona schools, districts with mask mandates are 3.5 times less likely to have an outbreak. And so I see that in my classroom, but that plays out across the entire state, and data backs it up. So our parents have been totally in limbo, teachers are in limbo, on top of the fact that we have a lot of academic work to do for kids and a lot of socio-emotional work to do with kids. And honestly, I think that the teacher shortage is already, at a precipice in Arizona, and I'm very worried about how we go forward. How do we take care of our educators? How do we take care of our kids? And the governor has completely exploited this crisis. And I think that, it truly underscores his privatization agenda. He's obviously trying to push as many public dollars to private schools and all of these unregulated online academies as possible. And, that was underscored by this new program. He's trying to send federal COVID relief dollars to private schools via vouchers. I think Charles alluded to that earlier. And just 2 days ago, the Biden administration slapped their wrist and said, no, you can't do that. Those dollars are to keep kids safe in school. And we know that program, like every program, was just another test balloon to sort of, have another case study to expand vouchers at the legislature next year. That's all it ever is. They're just constantly trying to widen the door. So the agenda has been laid bare. We are definitely seeing parents that are being whipped into a fury. They're being trained to go to school board meetings and, express their displeasure. And they're using the same talking points that are being used in Virginia and Iowa. And they're obviously being fueled by dark money interests. So I know we're going to talk about that today, but I'll just close with the fact that us teachers, district leaders, everybody just wants to keep kids and educators safe. And we want to curb community spread. And it is abhorrent that we are in a place where fighting for that very basic human need puts us in this situation where we're painted as the crazies or the bad guys. So here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and I'm sure like pretty much almost everybody listening to this has an awareness of something happening in their community or nearby with school board meetings, especially getting way more heated. And of course, it's definitely been a concerted, like organized effort nationally. And so one thing though that I think is really like noteworthy is a lot of these people, even with their outrage, they're still wanting to shape public schools so that they can send their kids to the public schools that they want to have their kids in. It's not that they're screaming at these school board meetings about how to get more vouchers. And that kind of connects with something that I found interesting is that I want to put to the three of you to kind of maybe discuss a little bit. And that's that these mask mandates in general are they're incredibly popular. Like people want to see them. I actually just saw a Fox News poll, I think less than a week old at this point, where they found that 67% of people were supportive of teachers and students wearing masks in schools. And there also 61% of people were in favor of teachers being vaccinated. And so this is really interesting that this mirrors kind of public opposition to vouchers and school choice programs, which are like really unpopular. They get voted down every time they're put on a ballot. And so what do you all see as this connection between these politicians in certain states that are pushing these really unpopular things both against public health and against public education. Hey, Adora, you're on mute. Say yes.
Thank you. Here I am. Yes, I really think that obviously those persons who are anti-mask, anti-living, because you're talking living and dying. And so obviously they have a real reason for that. They want to kill people off. And so it's obvious to us that those who are doing this, somebody's paying them to do this. Nobody's doing this because they just, feel so deeply about it. We know everything. We won't talk about it, but the bottom line is money starts there. We start there first. Where the money is found, that's where you'll find the action going on against public schools. We all are aware that years ago we finally started talking about vouchers and charter schools, but we knew that they were being funded by millionaires and billionaires and all. And so we're talking lots and lots of money that's going toward certainly school board members who are running for office and other people who are running for office, public officials. So the money is all over the place, and the more money that's poured in, the less schools we're going to be having if we allow it to continue, and the less teachers we're going to have. So everybody in the community should be fighting for this. It is not just a few of us out here that should be fighting. It should be everybody understanding that everybody is going to lose at the end of the day if in fact we continue to allow people with the money to keep their foot on the necks of those without the money. And we cannot allow them. We must stay up day and night and keep this fight going to keep public schools open by keeping those who have the money to fund those to say anti-mask, anti-teachers, anti-this, anti-that. No, 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 no. Wake up, everybody. It's going to take all of us. Let's save our schools. Everybody needs a school saved. Everybody wins when the schools are open. Everybody wins when we have jobs. Everybody wins when we're fighting together. This is for all of us. Don't allow Black and poor people to be beat on anymore. We've gone through hundreds of years of this. Stop it already.
And I think, it raises an interesting point, Charles, in that, and thank you, Adora, for expressing that, because this is, this critical moment that we do have to all wake up. But the interesting point to me is that, we have gotten to a place where partisan politics is driving our policy rather than data or science. We have gotten to a place where people will vote and operate against their own interest because they are being so driven by really hateful and venomous partisan politics. And that to me is something that's really remarkable about this moment, because as you said, parents have an instinct, and the polling, even, the polling of parents who weren't for punishing schools that had mask mandates. I saw a survey that suggested only 30% of Republicans even supported that. But yet, people are still seemingly compelled to support those same politicians who would put their own children in danger because they are so loyal to this sort of partisan game that has started and has really ramped up, which is really steeped in white supremacy. And, and I think that's the elephant in the room that we don't like to talk about, but that is what's really underlying and is the root of so much of this policymaking and so much of the fact that people are willing to step outside of their interests, their children's interests, their children's lives, and still stand with these kinds of things that they know are harmful.
Yeah, I would say you really hit the nail, the both of you, but like the elephant in the room is a big white supremacy elephant. And if you look at the history of privatization of schools in this country, especially like in the run-up and the decision in Brown v. Board, just the way that vouchers were pushed, who was pushing them, the alliances of people that pushed them, the birth of segregation academies, it has continued on to today. And I know that it can be easy for people to look back and think that that is ancient history. but it absolutely isn't. I mean, we had a gentleman who was working at the Goldwater Institute, Clint Bolick, who's now a Supreme Court justice in Arizona, who was fighting the Civil Rights Act of 1991, and then he goes on to help develop ESA vouchers. So, I mean, these are people who see any institutionalized efforts to implement and make progress on equity or to address like individual or aids to specific marginalized groups is problematic. And obviously that means that all of this public health issue, as it's connected to this radical agenda, is part of this like larger problem with white supremacy in America that we have yet to address. And so with that, I think one thing that's kind of interesting, a lot of people always say, let's follow the money. So who's funding these anti-mask efforts, and like how do they relate to the funders of these school voucher and school privatization programs?
I can speak to some of the groups in Arizona. So we are seeing a lot of AstroTurf protesters that are actually not parents in the district. I think that's really important to point out. These are people who are being, trained by the Koch brothers, by the DeVos folks, and by ALEC, right? All of these dark money special interest groups to go around to different school boards and to make a stink around masks and CRT and other issues, which, and they're the same people. We have seen footage of the same people going down way south in Arizona, like areas near Tucson, and then being in North Phoenix the very next night, and they're the same people. So, it's very concerning to see that happening. And then, there are other groups that are more DC focused, these think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, American Enterprise Institute, that churn out paper after paper trying to debunk the CDC, trying to say that masks don't work, right? And this is really dangerous because they're putting these papers out as though they are peer reviewed, as though they are science backed, and they aren't. And they do this with a ton of money, and they embed this in newspaper, digital ads, et cetera, all throughout the country, and then use that evidence or lack thereof to try and back up what these dark money groups are trying to fuel these parents or non-parents with. So it's very organized, it's very, unfortunately, very well orchestrated, and these folks are very good at weaponizing words against us in a very disciplined fashion across the US.
And we know the names of the people. I mean, there's no secret city here. Everybody who's talking and listening knows where the money is coming from. What we also know is where the money is coming from. They are paying other people. A lot of people are being paid to do the work and put on a face to it for anti-masking. It's very clear. We see it on TV all the time. We hear it discussed on television. And then we also know in our own neighborhoods who it is, because yes, partisan politics jumps in there and everything else you can talk about. Racism is big. It has always been big in this country. The NAACP was founded around this. The NAACP was founded around trying to be sure that public schools were open and made open for everybody. The whole idea is not to think that because you've got all the money or because you've got all the know-how, you think you can keep your foot on our necks, those of us who are Black and poor, and it's not going to happen without a fight. Unfortunately, the fight has turned deadly. We now are having more and more problems with crime. We're having more and more problems with juvenile justice issues because of this money piece coming down. And then we're getting nasty to shoot. Even in the school boards, they've got to have police officers to keep people from coming in with guns. People are dying. You talk about statistics. I should have brought those numbers in here to talk about how many people have died behind the gun trying to deal with public schools and make sure that they hurt and kill somebody. And the children have picked this up. The children have guns. Can you believe this? The children bring guns to school. Did you know that there are records that shows when children start? You know when they start? When they're in pre-kindergarten now. Pre-kindergarten, because that's where it started. Pre-kindergarten through 12th grades. And we have got to stop it. Just stop all of this craziness. But if all of us fight, we can do this. And we start by going to vote.
Yeah.
Try to vote, try to vote. That's your gun, the vote. Use it. It's deadly. They'll get out of office.
Bacardi, did you have something to add there?
Just dropped in the chat that there is a link to a Washington Post article that really does explore some of these connections, which I found interesting because I had not really known about sort of the sources of some of these funding, so certainly strongly suspected it, but they were able to uncover some of the Koch brothers funding of organizations like Independent Women's Network and Independent Women's Forum, and the connections between those kinds of big dollars. We're talking about an organization with $3.8 billion in revenues, funding these kinds of letters, and as you were talking about, Beth, these organized letters and campaign materials that people can go from board meeting to board meeting and share these materials to raise the same arguments in all of our states. And so, certainly there is an agenda that's I think a pretty insidious one. One of the things that's been most troubling to me is to see how many people we have seen put into policymaking roles in education who do not fundamentally support public education. We certainly saw we had a Secretary of Education who does not support public education. I live in Florida, where we have a Commissioner of Education who does not support public education. And so I feel like I'm living in an Orwellian world where love is hate and so forth, where we have people who are supposedly protectors of our school systems and the policymakers of our school systems who are purposefully undermining it. And we also know that we've seen trends where we know that school boards are very much in the sights of folks who have political aspirations, where that's an easy point of entree to get people up into other levels. And so it's a really, really disturbing reality that we're facing as it relates to the funding, as it relates to the politicization of these issues.
Sorry, Bacardi, it sounds like some of your audio is getting a little funky there, but a couple of the fantastic points that she made is, one, she did post an article in the chat box exploring a lot of those financial connections to the Koch network, who is obviously like a big component of the school choice, school privatization movement as well, as far as providing funds. And then also just some of the machinations of these groups, these individuals with resources to have people who are anti-education put into different positions across the country where they can influence the policies that direct public education. So they don't even support public schools. So whether it's the education commissioner in Florida or in New Hampshire, or I mean, under Trump, we had Betsy DeVos, so who didn't believe in public education. And of course, they've got people that they're trying to run as school board members. So really, it's every level that this game is being played at with our public schools. And really the goal is to undermine them so that people quit having faith in the amazing things that we can do together. It's why they fight unions. It's why they fight voting. It's why they fight so many things. They don't want to see us work together. And school choice individualizes and isolates us. Has suffering in the middle of a pandemic individualizes and isolates us. And so we definitely see a theme there. One of the things that I also wanted to see if we could get you all to address is just this issue that the pandemic is obviously disproportionately impacting communities of color, low-income communities, people living on tribal lands. Here in Arizona, where Beth and I live, the Navajo community and some of the other tribes were like heavily impacted. And so with these anti-mask mandates in schools, they're really affecting people who have to go to work. They need a place for their children to be safe. These people have fewer choices and options, and they're being pushed in lots of different ways. So how do we help these communities that are being the hardest hit and the most challenged due to long-standing kind of systemic issues of discrimination and racism? And before you answer, I do want to make a quick note to folks that there is a Q&A panel in the Zoom that you can put in questions so that we can put them to the panelists and get those answered. So yeah. Adora? Please, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was waiting. I'm like, okay. Yeah. Well, one of the things that we know is that, I'll go back to racism, that the idea that I want all and you will have nothing based on your color, and certainly if you're poor and if you're special needs. I mean, we all are in the group together who understand that the world was not made for us, they think, and they believe that everything in the world belongs to them. And when I say them, I'm talking about the multi-billionaires and those people who are responsible for all of the pain that we are experiencing, and the idea that we should not have jobs and we should not get money and we should not have homes and we should not have access to anything. And finally, we should not have access to life. So the idea that we all don't want to accept that, and that we all have a role in it. When I say we, I mean those without and those who have it. Those who have it, they have it because we allow it. We must keep pushing the fact that if you are Black in this country, you deserve to have not only reparations, but anything else this country has to give because it belongs to you. If you are poor, the same thing. If you are special needs, the same thing, because the same plight falls on all of us. And so if we will begin to understand that, we need to keep talking. We need to have more and more webinars. We need to keep writing. We need to keep using every means of media that we can to keep the word out here. You're not gonna win because we're together. That's why we're here today. This session is important, and all the other sessions that you plan are going to be critical. But then we've got to act on them. We can talk about it, we can listen, we can jump up and down and say what she or he said, but if we don't act on it, then the change will never come. But the wealthy and the rich will not win in the end. We are committed to that.
Thanks, Adora. And do we have any, Bacardi, do you have any thoughts there?
I do. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So yes, I do. And one is one of the things that Adora just touched on, which is about the narrative, right? You know, here in Florida, we have seen the direct connection between this kind of policymaking and the effort to use the pandemic to privatize. You know, there's a leveraging of this. We have seen the Department of Education forth a voucher to give to parents for any kind of concerns about masks, whether they are for or against masks. And in fact, if it were really about what the state is saying it's about, which they're claiming it's about parent choice, then you wouldn't be able to take one of these vouchers and go to a private school that has a mask mandate. So it's not about that. And if it was really about parent choice, you wouldn't have different rules applying to public schools than apply to private schools, but you do. So it is very, very important, one, for people to show up. Our school board members are under attack, the ones who have the courage to stand up against the bully pits. They are being threatened not only with money being withheld, but also their very jobs. And we have a strong history in this state of people reaching down and removing people from office. And that's a real threat. There is an overreach like I have never seen, a growth of executive power that we have to be mindful of. We also have to pay attention not only to what is happening in Tallahassee or in the various capitals of our states, but we have to pay attention to what's happening on our benches. A lot of times judicial elections are not being paid attention to. People don't pay attention to retention votes. They think they just vote yes. But those votes are equally important. The politicization of our courts is one of the things that will undermine our democracy in a way we cannot imagine that will last for generations. And so those elections are critical. We need to lift up what is happening in our courts, the really awful decisions that we are getting. People need to know about them. People need to have long memories when the elections come up again, and people need to make sure that these stories are being told. So I agree, Adora, we need the narratives, we need op-eds, we need people writing, we need people showing up in school board meetings, and showing up in Department of Education meetings, giving public comments. It is not okay for people to own a narrative and for a few voices to ring the loudest and seem to be what people are painting as the view of the community, because as you pointed out, Charles, it's not. But they are the loudest voices, they are the organized voices. And Dr. King, I think, once said something to the effect of, the people who believe in good or right have to be as well organized as the people who are fighting for evil. And I butchered that, but that's the effect of it, is we have to make sure there is a well-organized effort on the other side of the conversation. And sadly, oftentimes there is not, because it's hard to get people excited about it. But we have to just make sure we are paying attention and we show up, and that we pay attention to the narratives that are being told. It's
Awesome.
really, really important that we talk to the media.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your thoughts there. And I definitely want to kind of transition. We've got some great questions coming in from the audience, so I want to make sure we get to some of those. And obviously, one of the things I think is kind of sad is a lot of times in these conversations with other groups, they can really shy away from like this massive role that racism and other systemic issues play with all of this. And I love that this is something that the Southern Poverty Law Center and through that PFPS and obviously the NAACP, as you mentioned, Adora, embrace and are paying attention to. So one of the questions is about the obvious historic racism of school privatization. Like, how do groups like AFC manage to recruit people of color to participate as the kind of faces for some of their programs? And we've seen voucher programs now being pushed by groups of Black pastors. We have groups of like Black mothers in different places. And so, I mean, I think a lot of us can understand how white supremacy gets, I mean, it's something that affects all of us, even if you're a person of color, you're living in that world. But I'd love to hear like any thoughts that you all have about how that kind of plays out.
When you say racism, you say it all in that one word. And here is how it plays out for us. We have to begin to understand that we've got to take control. Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I think you just turned off your camera when you unmuted.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But you're great.
No, well, it's not really great, but
Well, go ahead and just continue with your thought, because that's the valuable piece.
Yes, I know. I was trying to get it. Okay. So if we begin to understand that one of the reasons, and I want to mention this because this is a very important piece I want to get out here today. It's very important to be concerned about our public schools and what our public schools teach in them to our children. I don't want to leave out these books. I don't want to leave out the curriculum, because this is all part and parcel of what the anti-public school people are doing and causing in our schools. The quality of education is really being impacted. We have got to find a way to always let all students know of all colors and race about the history of this country and the history of what is happening to us now, and how we are not going to repeat it, and how we are not going to let the next generation have to have this same discussion we're having today. We have a job to do. This is what we have to do, and it's a we. If you start allowing the people with the money to make no we by trying to kill us off in different forms, then we have got to make sure that it's their last time. There will not be another fight at the Capitol. You know, never again will you see people with guns going to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., trying to kill off your elected officials and kill off everybody that they want dead. We have got to stop it. We can do it. We can do it. This is it right here. Let's start right now from this program. We're going out together. Come on, guys.
Beth, did you have something to add there? I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I mean, I think Adora is completely right that the only way to fix this is to harness the power of the people to vote. I was reading, I think this was part of the Washington Post article, but I can't remember. But Steve Bannon of the alt-right crew has basically said on record in several places that he believes that school boards are the path to save the nation and building the bench. And so we're seeing this play out at the school boards very intentionally by the people who are white supremacists, who do want to, I mean, they say save the nation. We know that that is steeped in white supremacy. We know it's steeped in racism. And so, you know, I think it's undeniable in Arizona, everything we've seen, like it's white entitlement. Every single time that we hear about this school choice, it's all about me, me, me. It's not about the good of all of our communities. It's certainly not about, you know, providing for our students of color and students in poverty, students in rural areas, none of it. It's all about me, 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 and it's white entitlement. And
I mean, it's about escaping progress and equity, right? Like, I mean, these people, they saw Ruby Bridges coming in the door and they got their kids shuffled out the back to a different school, right? And they're doing the same thing to the
I do want to just add this to the conversation, Charles, and I'm sorry. And that is that I think, you know, one of the dangers when we do start talking about things like racism and white supremacy is we think we're just pointing to a person who has a bad ideological streak or idea or some hatred in their heart. And it's not just that. That's not the dangerous part of it. The dangerous part of it is what is invisible. The dangerous part is the caste system that we live in and that we act like does not exist. Or we act like we're not trying to return to. And that is where we see what is happening in public education. It is about creating a caste system. It is about saying that only the wealthy and those who already have privilege will continue to have that privilege because they are the only ones who will have access to a high quality education. And we don't care whether or not other people have that access. We just don't want to have to fund it. And so that's entrenching a caste system that is often invisible. And it means no one is immune to it. It means that it's not about the color of whoever the spokesperson's skin is. It is about the fact that we all swim in this dirty air. And yes, we are the Black community. We are often the canaries in the mine, as Lonnie Grenier told us decades ago. We might die first, but the air is poisonous for everybody. And so we have got to pay attention to the entire system. And as you said, Beth, it is about having some sort of a collective consciousness about what is in the public good for everyone.
And you know, oh, I'm sorry.
We do have other questions, so I do want to move on so we can touch on some other things. But also, I would just agree with you. It's definitely not an individual issue. The other dangers is that this is also so institutionalized in America that it's almost impossible to get away from because the systems are built to maintain things.
And would you add to that the demographics that are happening in this country? The fact that the country is changing and fewer whites, so that in the next 20 years, it's going to look a lot different based on who's here. So they're losing. We know that, and we've got to begin to push.
Well, I think even without like the demographic shift, the more I talk to young people, the more they seem to like catch on faster about some of these bigger issues. And so I think that young people are better than where I was when I was their age. And so that's also some of the fear, is that their kids are moving away from where they were at. And so that's actually something I have a bunch of questions in here. I can see at least like 3 of them, I think, about like connecting this anti-CRT rhetoric, this thing about anti-racial equity training in schools. Like, how does this all connect to the anti-masking movement? Because I know we're seeing the same people fighting equity, fighting CRT, the same people fighting masks and vaccines. So how does that connect?
I think it's the same dark money groups that are whipping everybody into this, crazy manufactured outrage that we're seeing. And they're just kind of throwing everything at the cabinets and to see what sticks. And, if all of this me, choice is steeped in racism, which we know it is, those arguments are going to stick faster. And it's fear. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it's part of that long game, right? Like this is a generational battle. And so it's not even just about, what the demographic shift is, it's about the ideological shifts, because as you said, young people are critical thinkers. They have a lot more information at their fingertips. And so people feel a real danger in that, and young people being able to critically analyze what's in front of them. The notion of critical race theory, while it's a heady, scholarship that is taught in graduate level courses that I had to have a dictionary for when I studied it decades ago, it is embedded in this notion when we start to understand structural and systemic racism. And so there's a danger for people who want to maintain the status quo, because the real danger is not just about whether it's Black and white people being segregated. It's about if poor people get together and recognize they have interest that is shared across racial lines, that's when the people currently in power are in trouble. And so, that is to me the long game that's being played here. And it's also about the undermining of public education. You are chilling teachers, you are chilling speech, you are chilling training that is happening in schools, and you've seen educators leave in droves. People don't want to put up with it. And we've lost some really good people in our education spaces, superintendents included. And so, this is part of that broader attack on public education.
Right. Well, I think it's almost time for us to wrap up, unfortunately, because this has been really invigorating. I've enjoyed the conversation. And I love that, throughout, we've talked about what can people do to make a difference, and things that we've talked about is getting involved in your local community, showing up to school board meetings, writing op-eds, voting, showing up. There's a number of different ways we can volunteer and get involved. There are communities of activists all around doing different things, but also just stay connected to PFPS, to the SPLC, the NAACP, stay connected to these groups and kind of follow their lead on some of it, and just get involved, get your hands dirty, because together we can really make a big difference in all of these things. So thanks again to all of you. Thank you so much to the Ed Law Center and PFPS for putting this together. I really appreciate it, Jessica.
Thank you all so much. This conversation has been educational, inspiring, and motivating. So as Adora said, let this be the start of our renewed efforts together, and Public Funds Public Schools is honored to be a part of this with all of you. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, to our moderator and all our speakers. Please remember to sign up for updates on the Public Funds Public Schools website, pfps.org, and we look forward to continuing these discussions and this work with all of you. Thank you.